Hello and welcome to this webinar on motivational interviewing. My name is Dr. Ali Demario and I'm an educational psychologist for the Xavier Catholic Education Trust. To fully train in motivational interviewing, you'd need to attend a longer course, but today I will share some of the key principles and techniques that you would need to be able to start to implement some of these ideas in the school setting. The session is designed for all school staff and it's best used to train groups, for example during a staff meeting or a CPD session, but some of these activities can also be adapted if you're watching on your own, and I'll guide you through that as we go. We're going to start the session with a quick experiment. If you're doing this training in a group, split into partners and label yourselves A and B. Partner A, you are going to close your fist tightly, and partner B, you have 2 minutes to try to get them to open their fist without bribery, trickery, or touching them in any way, just using conversation. If you're doing this alone, imagine that you are partner B and note down a list of questions or things that you might say to partner A. Pause the activity now for 2 minutes to do the activity. If you did this activity as a group, just take a few minutes now to discuss what worked well and what approaches definitely didn't work. Did anyone manage to get their partner to open their fist? The purpose of this task is as a quick introduction to motivation interviewing, as this is what motivation interviewing is all about, trying to evoke change just using conversation. Our second activity is another paired activity. So for this one, partner A, tell your partner about something that you're interested in doing, but you also have mixed feelings about. So it might be that you would like to go and do more exercise. It might be that you'd like to eat more healthy, drink less alcohol, maybe redress your work-life balance. Partner B, all you're going to do is listen, but then argue strongly in favour of one of the options. Partner A, what you would need to do then, while partner B is arguing strongly in favour, I want you to listen and note down how you are thinking and feeling in response to partner B giving you very strong direction. If you are doing this alone, or if you're watching this alone, just have a think about a situation that you have mixed feelings about and write down a pros and cons list for the reasons to change and the reasons not to change. Pause the video now and restart following the activity and a discussion afterwards about what you felt. The chances are that for some of you, maybe it was what you needed to motivate yourself to change and now you're going to go and make that change. However, for many of you, someone arguing strongly in favour of one option may have driven you further in the opposite direction. You may have felt that your partner wasn't really listening to the reasons for your mixed feelings and didn't really understand or empathise with your situation. Try to imagine this in a school situation. A young person might really want to get good grades, but working hard every lesson feels difficult and it's much easier to mess around with their friends. As a member of staff, we clearly want them to change their behaviour, but in pushing our agenda, we may be pushing them further down in the opposite direction. So what is motivation interviewing? Motivation interviewing is a counselling approach designed to help people to find the motivation to make positive behaviour change. The person-centred approach is particularly effective for people who have mixed feelings about changing their behaviour. So Miller and Rolnick, they said that motivation interviewing is a collaborative conversational style to strengthen a person's own motivation and commitment to change. The emphasis is on empowering individuals to explore and challenge their own patterns of behaviour so that people talk themselves into change based on their own values and interests. So overall, motivation interviewing is a guiding style of communication that sits between following, where you'd just be listening, and directing, where you're giving information and advice. Motivation interviewing is designed to empower people to change by drawing out their own meaning, importance and capacity for change. And it's based on a respectful and curious way of being with people that facilitates the natural process of change and honours students' autonomy. It's important to note that motivation interviewing requires the teacher to engage with the student as an equal partner and refrain from unsolicited advice, which we give so often, confronting, instructing, directing or warning. It's not a way to get people to change or a set of techniques to impose on the conversation. Motivation interviewing takes time, practice and requires a lot of self-awareness and discipline from the teacher. Motivational interviewing was originally developed by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick to treat alcohol addiction. It has since been applied across a broad range of settings, including health, education, and the criminal justice system, and for lots of different presenting concerns, including health, fitness, nutrition, treatment adherence, substance abuse, mental health, illegal behaviours, gambling, and parenting. While the principles and skills of motivational interviewing are useful in a wide range of conversations, motivational interviewing is particularly useful to help people examine their situation and opinions when any of the following are present. When ambivalence is high and people are stuck in mixed feelings about change, when confidence is low and people doubt their ability to change, when desire is low and people are uncertain about whether they want to make a change, and when importance is low and the benefits of change or disadvantages of the current situation are unclear to the person, even when they are very clear to you. Motivational interviewing is a great tool in any situation where you feel like you are giving pupils so many opportunities to change and they're just not taking them. Brain development in adolescents mean that they are questioning the status quo, and it's natural for them to question adults and seek to follow their own path. And motivational interviewing can really help us to walk down the right path with them, guiding them from beside, rather than pushing or pulling them in the direction that we want them to go and pushing them further in the opposite direction. According to Rolnick's 2016 book about motivational interviewing in schools, motivational interviewing can be used in the following contexts: behaviour, supporting learning, working with parents, bullying, EBSA, emotionally based school avoidance, children at risk of exclusion, and for personal development, for example, fitness, exercise, diet, etc. Rolnick suggests that motivational interviewing is a conversational style, so it doesn't always have to be a long series of therapeutic sessions delivered by a counsellor. It can be as small as taking opportunities for conversation using this style in a corridor on the way to a lesson to start to sow the seeds of change. So how could it be used? It could be one-off sessions where you sit with the child for half an hour or maybe longer to talk about the change that you want to see and how that might come about. It might be during detentions when you're having those restorative conversations. It might be a conversation in the corridor or at the start of the day or the end of the day, maybe during form time. It could be a series of sessions, so it could be with the ELSA or with a counsellor, or maybe through mentoring sessions or coaching sessions. And who could deliver it? It could be a counsellor or an ELSA, and the ELSAs have had some training on it during their 6-day training, but it also could be, on the basis of this training, it could be senior leadership team, or it might be support staff or teaching staff, or in some situations at secondary school, it could be peers that are trained up to use some of the motivational interviewing techniques with each other. This slide covers some of the main components of motivational interviewing. So Miller and Rolnick suggest that active listening is fundamental in motivational interviewing. We'll talk a bit more about how you would do that in future slides. It's also been suggested that motivational interviewing is good for young people who require a more collaborative and non-confrontational approach. And this approach supports change rather than imposes it. And most research is on secondary age and upper primary school age, but Frey et al. Suggests that actually it could also be used with younger children as well. McNamara suggests that interventions for young children with social, emotional and mental health needs have mainly focused on behavioural interventions that use extrinsic motivation, so things like reward and punishment. And actually we need to shift towards intrinsic change, where there's a focus on the thoughts, feelings and collaboration, and developing intrinsic motivation in the young person to make that change and want to make that change themselves. Within motivational interviewing, there is this cycle of change that has 5 steps, and I'm going to take you through those 5 steps now. So generally, when we have something that requires change, we start off at the pre-contemplation phase, which is a time when actually the person doesn't really realise that they have a problem or that they need to change their behaviour. And this might be the case for a lot of the pupils that you're working with, where you want them to change, but actually they don't really recognise that there's a problem at all. So that's the pre-contemplation phase, where they've not really started thinking about it. Motivational interviewing at that point is about raising their awareness, and we'll go through each of these stages one by one about how you would actually use motivational interviewing. Stage 2 is the contemplation phase, and this is the point at which you were at with your example that you used before, where you've got mixed emotions. You want to change, but you've also got ambivalence about it, where you also don't want to change. And that's the contemplation phase. They realise there's a problem, but there's lots of reasons why they don't really want to change as well. And motivation interviewing at that point is all about resolving the ambivalence and helping them to go to and from with the pros and cons, and think about which direction they would like to go in. The third stage is preparation. They've decided, yes, I am going to make a change. So it's about supporting them in planning how they're going to make that change. There's then the action phase, where they're taking action towards change. Maintenance, where they've made the change, but we need to focus on how they're going to maintain that. And then also motivation interviewing thinks about relapse and thinks about the fact that actually you've made this change, but whenever we make a change, we can have relapse. So it's planning for relapse and planning about what we would do if there was a bit of a blip along the way. We're going to talk now about the principles of motivation interviewing and how they work in practice to make your motivation interviewing really effective. And there are 2 acronyms to help you to remember these principles. The first one is OARS, which is really annoying because it doesn't make a proper word. And then the second one is OARS, which we'll talk about in a moment. So OARS, the first part of that, the A, is avoid arguing. The second part is rolling with resistance, and what that means is avoiding what's called the righting reflex, and that's the compulsion that we all have to correct someone when we feel that they're in the wrong and to give them advice, especially when we feel responsible for them. Unfortunately, when we use the righting reflex, it almost always results in very unhelpful responses, things like, yes, but. It's not a good way to encourage change, and you probably would have experienced that in the activity that we did second, where you talked about something you're ambivalent about and somebody used the righting reflex to try to push you in a particular direction. And it's really not a good way to encourage change. So rolling with resistance is the term that motivation interviewing uses for not responding with persuasion, but to sidestep an argument and encourage conversation instead. Motivation interviewing suggests that you acknowledge ambivalence about decision and therefore some resistance to change as perfectly normal. Doing this immediately lowers resistance. The next one is E, express empathy. So instead of judging, staff should focus on understanding the situation from their pupil's point of view, and that's known as empathy. So it's important to say that you don't have to agree with them to show empathy. You may really disagree with their course of action and their behaviour, but empathy is about surrendering your own opinion in order to understand someone else's. What is happening for them and where is this behaviour coming from? This practice creates a safe space where pupils feel comfortable being themselves and sharing their concerns, and that is a good platform for change. D stands for develop discrepancy. So developing discrepancy is based on the belief that a person becomes more motivated to change once they see a mismatch between where they are now and where they want to be. And it's the member of staff's job to help the pupil to identify what their core values are and their personal goals. Goals and actions are developed in a trusting, collaborative atmosphere free from pressure. And this offers an environment that is based on the person's needs, wishes, goals, values and strengths. And they can look at where their behaviour is and how that differs from their goals that they would like to get to. And finally, S stands for support self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is a person's belief or confidence in their ability to perform a target behaviour. A teacher following the motivation interviewing approach supports the child's self-efficacy by reinforcing their power to make the changes that they want. They guide them through the behaviour change process, recognising the positive changes that pupils make and offer encouragement along the way. In the beginning, the member of staff may have more confidence in the individual than they have in themselves, but this can change with ongoing support. And soon the pupil starts to recognise their strengths and their ability to change their behaviour for the better. And that brings us on to our second acronym, OARS. So OARS stands for the way in which you would use active listening. And there are 4 main components in active listening. So O stands for open questions, A is affirmations, R is reflective listening, and S is summarising. So to start with the O, open questions are questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. And these type of questions encourage the pupil to think more deeply about an issue. Examples of open questions that you might ask include things like, how would you like things to be different? What have you tried before to make a change? What can you tell me about your relationship with that teacher? A stands for affirmations. Affirmations are statements that recognises a person's strengths and acknowledges their behaviours, their positive behaviours. And done right, affirmations can help to build a person's confidence in their ability to change, their self-efficacy that we talked about in the previous slide. Examples of affirming responses include, you're clearly a very resourceful person. You handled yourself really well in that situation. I'm so glad that you came to see me today. I know that it isn't always easy to talk about how you feel. Or, I appreciate that it took a lot of courage for you to discuss that with me today. R stands for reflections, and reflections are based on careful listening and trying to understand what the person is saying by repeating, rephrasing, or offering a deeper guess about what the person's trying to communicate. And that's a foundation skill of motivation interviewing and how we express empathy. This might mean reflecting back what you've heard by restating what they've said. So for example, if they say, I'm so angry with her, reflecting back, you might say, what she did really hurt you. Or noticing and labelling feelings. For example, I hand in my homework every time and he still picks on me, it's so unfair. And a reflection of the feeling there might be, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated and helpless. Finally, the S stands for summarising. Summarising ensures shared understanding and reinforces key points made by the client. At the end of them sharing with you, you would try to summarise the key points of what they have said to you. And that might start with something like, okay, so let me just check that I've understood. And then you would summarise what they've said. So this is an example from the Rolnick book about motivation interviewing in schools that I just wanted to share with you. Because it shows you clearly how they've used OARS within this. So there's open questions, reflections, and an affirmation. It doesn't go into the summarising because that would be quite long. But just to give you a flavour of it, so the teacher has said, and how did you react? So a nice open question. I don't know, I just lost it. You were upset. So it's reflected back how she was feeling. Yeah, I was, and she ran off laughing with her friends. And that must have left you feeling more upset. Again, she's reflecting back the feelings. No, I was angry then. I wanted to take her head off and I had no one to turn to. So what did you do? Open question. It'd be very easy to jump in there and judge or use the writing reflex about how we don't take people's heads off in school, we don't retaliate. But she doesn't. She asks an open question. And then Kathy says, well, you saw me and so I told you. And then the teacher replies, that would have taken some courage. So again, she gives that affirmation to build that self-efficacy. We're now going to go through each one of the stages, thinking about how you could use motivation interviewing and what kind of practical questions you could use at each point and resources that you could use to try to move towards change. So everybody starts at the pre-contemplative stage. And remember at this point, the person or pupil can't see a problem with themselves and they might see the problem as belonging to someone else, and therefore they're lacking the motivation to make any change in their own lifestyle. So this might look like students saying, there's nothing wrong with how I behave, it's the teachers who can't handle it, they have the problem, not me. The key things to do at this stage are firstly to create rapport, and the best way of doing that is simply through using OARS, the open questions, the affirmations, reflecting back how they're feeling, developing that sense that you're really empathising with them and validating how they're feeling. You also might aim to look in the future rather than immediate change. So it can be quite hard to think about immediately what they should be doing to change, but if you can think more generally about the future that they want, then that can help to get some commitment towards change. The third thing is about rolling with that resistance and not pushing them too hard in one direction, but accepting and validating how they feel. And then there's an example there on the right-hand side of the slide that shows the difference between validating how they're feeling and empathising with them and collusion. And obviously we want to avoid collusion and reinforcing how they're feeling, but we do want to validate and empathise. So the kinds of questions that you might use at the pre-contemplative stage would be things like, what are the good things about your behaviour? And how has it helped you? What do you gain from behaving in this way? Are there things that you don't like about your behaviour? How has it stopped you from doing what you want to do? Is there anything at school that you would like to be different? What is most important in your life? And how does your behaviour fit with your long-term plan? Visualisation can be a really powerful tool in encouraging young people to look at what change might look and feel like without putting too much pressure on them. So this is an example of visualisation, which is something that occurs throughout it exists in lots of different therapeutic approaches, like solution-focused therapy, for example, and it's called the miracle question. And this is a version of the miracle question. There are other examples of the miracle question, but they all follow roughly the same pattern, but just adapted to be suitable for the age. This might feel a bit silly, but imagine that you went to bed one night and while you were sleeping, a miracle happened and all the problems that you've been facing just disappeared. When you get out of bed the next morning, what would you notice that would give you clues that the miracle had happened? What small signs are there that your best hopes are happening already? At home, school, or other places, what's different? What will other people notice about you? Picture later in the day, what's happening now? What else is telling you that your best hopes have been realised? Dr. Cathy Atkinson from the University of Manchester has put together a resource pack of motivational interviewing resources that you can use with children and young people. And these are all saved on the SharePoint so that you have access to them. This is one of the examples of an activity that you might use with a child who's at that pre-contemplative phase. And it's really focusing on not the immediate change, like we said, but about thinking about the future and how you'd like the future to look, which might develop that discrepancy to help them to think about making change. And so this activity is just about looking in the future and how would you like your life to look like in however many years' time? What job might you want? What would you want your health to be like? Relationships, lifestyle, hobbies, other. But obviously you could create your own version of this to be appropriate for the age of the pupils that you're working with. So now we're on to stage 2, the contemplative phase. So at this point, the pupil is on the fence. So it might be, I can see why it might be helpful to change my behaviour, but at the same time, I'm not sure I want to change. So they've got that ambivalence there. Again, what you need to do is refer back to OARS, the open questioning, the affirmations, reflective listening and summarising. Move with the pupil and be guided by them. So if they move back to thinking that the problem lies elsewhere, maybe go back and use the reflective questions from the slide before, from the pre-contemplative phase. And if they begin to discuss changes and how they like to implement it, you can move forward to the planning stage and identifying their motivating factors. One useful technique here is to bear in mind their confidence in their making a change, their self-efficacy, and also how important that change is to them. So some things to keep in mind at this point. Do, as I said, move backwards and forwards with the pupil. Do think about their confidence and importance, and you can use scaling activities, which we'll talk about in a moment. Don't give advice. Start to problem solve and make suggestions using that writing reflex. Don't talk about your own experiences. Don't ignore all the negative points and just focus on the positives, because that will make them bring in the yes buts and push them further in the opposite direction. And don't only focus on the positives of the change. So this is what the questions might look like at this point. What makes you want to change? What's different about you now that means that you want to change compared to before? What makes you think that you could change if you tried? Can you tell me about a time when your behaviour wasn't a problem and how it made you feel? What would your future look like in the next 5 years if you do make the change? But also not ignoring the positives, so saying what might be hard about making that change. Another activity here from the resources by Cathy Atkinson. So this one's thinking about the future and the present. If their behaviour stays the same, what might happen? And if their behaviour changes, what might happen? And then if that happens, what might happen next and what might happen next? So it's a good way of plotting it out without you pushing them in a particular direction, but just guiding them side by side towards the right path themselves. And this is a very similar activity. This one's by Dr. Jerica Holder in her booklet that's all about using motivational interviewing to tackle EBSA, or emotionally based school avoidance. And this one's about what could this change bring to my life and thinking about the pros and cons of that. And here's an example of the scaling that we talked about, of thinking from on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is that change to me right now? And on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident do I feel that I could make that change? So if you're watching this in a group at a staff meeting, it's time to put some of this into practice. So go back to the problem that you experienced ambivalence about before when we did exercise 2. And instead this time, partner B, instead of arguing and pushing them in one direction, this time I'd like you to try asking some of the questions that I put up on the slide before for the contemplative stage. And partner A, afterwards, I'd like you to reflect on and discuss as a group how that felt. So what I'll do now is I'll put those questions up for you on the next slide, and you just might want to pause for a few minutes while you do the activity. And on to the preparation stage. So by this point, the pupil has decided that change is probably the best way to go. However, they still might need a bit of reassurance and a bit of support with that self-efficacy that this is what they should be doing and they are capable of doing it. So support them by discussing the pros and cons of change and continue to confirm that their belief that change is the best choice. However, do encourage pupils to take things one step at a time. Change is hard work and can be tiring, and if you go in too hard, it may mean relapse happens much more easily. So be reasonable about how much can be achieved all at once. The kind of questions that you might ask at the preparation stage might be things like, what other options are there? What are the pros and cons of each option? What consequences might there be? How might other people react to this change? What do you think you will do? What will you do first? Who will help you with this change? And who has been able to help you in the past? At this stage, it's really important still to be acknowledging that change isn't necessarily going to be easy. So this activity from Kathy Atkinson is all about the good things about change and also the less good things, just to make sure that they're prepared and can plan what they will do about the less good things. And another activity here from Dr. Jerica Holder, this change would help me too, and then some ideas about what it would do for them. So on to the action stage. I've made the decision to change and I've taken the first step towards it. And now we need to think about how we can help them to carry on with making that change. Questions that you might ask at the action stage might be things like, what's better since last time we met? What are you doing instead of the problem? How will you know when this problem is solved? And how will you know when you are happier? And a lovely activity here that you could use by Dr. Jerica Holder is this readiness ruler. Again, this comes from solution focused therapy, where it's thinking about where am I now? What number am I at from 1 to 10? Where am I? What's got me here? And what keeps me going? Where would I like to be? And what do I need to be able to get there? You also might want to encourage them to use journaling. So thinking about what am I going to try this week? What did I manage to do? How did I feel? Did other people notice? And what did they say or what did they do? What am I pleased with? What do I need help with? What's going to be my next step? And what do I hope or what do I want other people to notice? And the final stage is maintenance stage. So they've made the change, you've guided them the whole way through, they've made the change that you want them to make through their own intrinsic motivation, with you guiding them from alongside, and now it's just about maintaining that change. And here are some questions that you can use at the maintenance stage. So, what is better? What helped you to achieve it? How did you manage it? How did you get through that time that was so difficult? And what did it take for you to be able to do that? So carrying on building their self-efficacy and giving them that confidence that they can carry on to have this change. How confident are you about keeping this up? So you might go back to the scaling that you did before about how important it is for them now, how confident they feel now, because that will really help them see the progress visually that they've made. And also more affirmations and building that self-efficacy through questions like, what does this tell you about yourself that you didn't know before? And an activity that you could use at this stage would be this, sticking with it. So what do I need to sustain this change? Answering things like, why is this change important to me? What do I need to help me to keep going? And what do I do if I have a setback? Because we need to plan for relapse, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So when it comes to relapse, we're always going to have blips when we have a change in behaviour, and it's just about really normalising it and reducing the shame and guilt that they might feel over that relapse, and just helping them to see that it's just a blip and not a permanent change, and that they haven't gone straight back to square one. Asking questions might be to help them to prepare for relapse, might be things like, if you do relapse, who will listen and understand? How will you be able to tell that person? What are you going to do to stop things from getting worse at that point? What is going to stop it from getting worse? And who is going to be able to help you? And this is the last activity that we're going to do today. So I'd just like you to think, if you are in a group watching this, pause it for a moment to think about these questions. In what situations can you envisage using motivation interviewing with young people and children? And what else will you need to be able to use it effectively? If you're on your own, just note these things down. Some things that might be helpful as next steps could be maybe going on the SharePoint and having a look at the resources that have been saved on there for you. So you've got access to the Jerica Holder resources, the Kathy Atkinson resources, the PowerPoint from today, and obviously this recording. But also, Motivation Interviewing in Schools, this book, Conversations on Improving Behaviour and Learning by Stephen Rolnick and others. That is a really great book to read, which hopefully will really cement some of these ideas and help you to implement it into practice. As a final reflection, I'd ask you to think back to that very first activity that we did with the closed fist. And just think, now that you know all of these tools for motivation interviewing, maybe pause and take a few moments to note down, if you're on your own or talk about with the people that you're with, think about how you would approach that differently now. Are there different questions that you would ask? Is there a different technique that you would ask that you think would be helpful in that situation? And finally, I just wanted to finish with this quote. A good teacher will lead the horse to water, an excellent teacher will make the horse thirsty first. And that's what motivation interviewing is all about. Thank you so much for listening.